David Bryan Sentelle was born on February 12, 1943, in Canton, North Carolina, the son of Horace and Maud Sentelle. He grew up in western North Carolina and earned his Bachelor of Arts from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1965, then his J.D. with honors, from UNC School of Law in 1968. After law school, Sentelle briefly practiced in Asheville, 1968 to 1970, before serving as an assistant United States attorney in Charlotte from 1970 to 1974. In 1974, Sentelle was elected as a state district court judge in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, where he served until 1977. He then entered private practice as a partner in a Charlotte law firm, Tucker, Hicks, Sentelle, Moon and Hodge, from 1977 until 1985. During this period, he also lectured in law and became active in Republican politics. For example, he was a longtime supporter of Senator Jesse Helms's campaigns and even served as an alternate delegate to the 1984 Republican National Convention. One colleague from that era recalled Sentelle as a politically conservative guy. In 1985, Sentelle was nominated by President Ronald Reagan to the U.S. District Court for the Western District of North Carolina, filling a vacancy on that court. He was confirmed by the Senate and took his commission on October 17, 1985. During his short tenure on the district bench, Sentelle handled a variety of civil and criminal cases. In February 1987, President Reagan nominated Sentelle to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, the seat vacated by Antonin Scalia's elevation to the Supreme Court. The Senate confirmed him unanimously on September 9, 1987, and he joined the court later that month. Sentelle served as an active judge on the D.C. Circuit from 1987 until 2013, including a term as chief judge from 2008 to 2013. He assumed senior status on February 12, 2013, but has continued to sit on cases. During his D.C. Circuit tenure, Sentelle took on several special leadership roles. From 1992 to 2006, he was the presiding judge of the Special Division of the Court, which oversees the appointment of independent counsels in major federal investigations. In that capacity, he headed the three-judge panel that in August 1994 replaced special counsel Robert Fisk with Kenneth Starr in the Whitewater/Clinton investigation. This move was controversial at the time because Sentelle had met with Senators Lach Faircloth and Jesse Helms just weeks before the replacement. However, the circuit's chief judge later ruled that Sentelle's involvement complied with the statute, since he acted in an Article II capacity outside the normal recusal rules. Later, Sentelle served on the Judicial Conference of the United States and was a member of its executive committee from 2008 to 2013, chairing it from 2010 to 2013. In May 2018, he was appointed to the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court of Review, FISCR, and became its presiding judge in 2020. Over his career, Sentelle has authored many important opinions. As presiding judge of the Special Independent Counsel Panel, Sentelle headed the unanimous panel that appointed Kenneth Starr to investigate the Whitewater matter. The decision drew attention after it was revealed that he had met with North Carolina senators shortly beforehand, but ethics complaints were dismissed on the ground that he acted in an Article II capacity outside normal recusal rules. Sentelle was on the D.C. Circuit panels that reversed convictions in the Iran-Contra scandal. In 1990, he and Judge Lawrence Silberman formed the 2-1 majority that vacated one of Oliver North's convictions, Chief Judge Patricia Wall dissenting. In 1991, he joined Judge Douglas Ginsburg's panel to overturn the conviction of John Poindexter, Chief Judge Abner Mikva dissenting. In both cases, the majority held that trial errors involving immunized testimony justified reversal. In this leading securities class action case, Sentelle wrote the D.C. Circuit opinion affirming dismissal of the complaint. It became his most cited decision and is still studied for its articulation of fraud pleading standards, despite later legislative changes. Sentelle authored the D.C. Circuit opinion that largely affirmed a district court judgment holding the federal government had mismanaged Native American trust accounts. The government eventually settled the case in 2009 for over $3.4 billion, one of the largest class action settlements in history. Sentelle wrote the 2-1 panel opinion invalidating President Obama's intra-session recess appointments to the National Labor Relations Board. The panel held that, under the text the recess in Article II, appointments could be made only between formal sessions of Congress and only to vacancies arising during a recess. The U.S. Supreme Court unanimously upheld the judgment on different reasoning, but affirmed Sentelle's result. Sentelle wrote many other notable opinions. In a 2005 case, ABA vs. FTC, he famously quipped that finding congressional authorization for the FTC to regulate lawyers would be like hiding a rather large elephant in a rather obscure mouse hole. His jurisprudence has been consistently conservative and textualist, drawing heavily on the wording and historical context of statutes and the Constitution. Sentelle is widely regarded as a conservative, textually minded jurist. He was active in Republican politics before taking the bench and was consistently described by contemporaries as politically conservative. In his opinions, he often looks to the literal wording and historical context of statutes and the Constitution. Such formalist reasoning has attracted praise from conservative commentators and has influenced later generations of judges and scholars. Outside the courtroom, Sentelle has maintained numerous professional affiliations. He was a founder and longtime president of the Edward Bennett Williams American Inn of Court in Washington and in 2008 received the IN's National Professionalism Award. He has also taught law as a visiting professor at several universities including UNC Chapel Hill, UNC Charlotte, Florida State, George Mason, and Georgia. He served as presiding judge of the Independent Counsel Special Division and later as chair of the Judicial Conference's Executive Committee. In May 2018 he was appointed to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court of Review and became its presiding judge in 2020. Judge Sentelle is also a published author. In 2002 he wrote a popular memoir titled Judge Dave and the Rainbow People, recounting his 1987 experience on the North Carolina District Bench when he handled a lawsuit brought by a group of hippies, the Rainbow Gathering, camping in Nantahala Forest. The story, later adapted into a law review article and book, was noted for its humor and pragmatism. In addition to his judicial opinions, Sentelle has published many law review articles on topics like administrative law and legislative history. He has also written crime fiction under the pseudonym Clyde Haywood. These writings reflect Sentelle's wide-ranging interests and storytelling skill. Sentelle married Jane LaRue Oldham in 1965, and they have 3 daughters. They are active in their community and church. Colleagues remember Sentelle as outgoing and cordial. He often greets clerks and colleagues in a cowboy hat and boots, and is famous for chatting casually and smoking a cigar with his staff in the courthouse. He is also a Freemason and received a Grand Lodge of North Carolina medal for his service. As a judge, Sentelle has had a substantial public impact. His opinions on the First Amendment, executive power, administrative law, and other areas are widely cited in legal practice and scholarship. He has been a mentor to many clerks, several of whom have risen to prominent positions including Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch and several federal appellate judges. His career on the D.C. Circuit, leadership in the judiciary, and commitment to textualist principles have made him one of the most influential conservative judges of his generation. The preface by John A. Bodden and Ramona Maritz Bodden introduces Judge Dave and the Rainbow People by explaining how their encounter with the Rainbow family in Montana's Beaverhead National Forest in 2000 led them to reflect on Judge David Sentelle's pivotal 1987 court decision involving the same group in North Carolina. They describe how the Rainbows and local ranchers, though initially clashing over land use, ultimately learned to coexist, echoing the balance of rights and responsibilities central to Sentelle's case. The authors frame the book as a study of how legal reasoning, ecological awareness, and cultural understanding can work together to minimize conflict and promote mutual respect between unconventional communities and traditional rural life. In the introduction by C. Boyden Gray, he praises Judge David Sentelle for his integrity, humor, and devotion to the rule of law, noting how Judge Dave and the Rainbow People reveals Sentelle's ability to balance justice with humanity. Gray highlights the book's account of Sentelle's encounter with the Rainbow family as a vivid example of how law can mediate between authority and freedom without losing compassion or common sense. He frames the story as a reflection of Sentelle's judicial philosophy, grounded in constitutional restraint, respect for individual liberty, and a wry appreciation of life's ironies, qualities that made him a model of principled judging and good humor in public service. In the prologue of Judge Dave and the Rainbow People, Judge David B. Sentelle sets the stage by recalling how he came to write about the 1987 Rainbow family gathering in North Carolina's Nantahala National Forest. Prompted years later by a curious law clerk, Sentelle reflects on his unusual experience presiding over a case that tested the balance between individual freedoms and state authority. The prologue introduces the Rainbows, a free-spirited, non-traditional group advocating peace and communal living, and the legal and cultural tensions their gathering created. Sentelle presents the episode with humor, humility, and insight, emphasizing both the absurdity and significance of the clash between countercultural ideals and the structured world of federal law. In Part 1, Toward World Peace and Healing, Judge David B. Sentelle recounts the 1987 Rainbow family gathering in the Nantahala National Forest of western North Carolina, where thousands assembled for a world peace and healing reunion. He describes the Rainbows as an amorphous, leaderless group devoted to peace, communal living, and spiritual freedom, though their spontaneous, unregulated encampment created legal and environmental tensions with state and federal authorities. As the presiding judge, Judge Dave introduces the case that arose from this cultural collision between countercultural idealism and governmental regulation, blending wry humor and legal insight to illustrate how the courts, the state, and the rainbows all struggled to define the limits of freedom, order, and responsibility within America's democratic and environmental frameworks. Ignorance is Bliss opens the story of the 1987 Rainbow family gathering in the remote Nantahala National Forest of western North Carolina, describing the event's location, history, and the unique culture of the rainbows. He portrays them as a loosely organized, non-commercial community of thousands who gather annually to promote peace, love, and environmental harmony, while also highlighting the logistical and legal challenges their spontaneous, large-scale encampments pose. With characteristic humor, Judge Dave contrasts the rainbow's idealism with the pragmatic concerns of local residents and officials, setting up the central tension of the book, the uneasy coexistence between free-spirited expression and the structured demands of law and order. The Beginning of Wisdom describes the initial legal confrontation between the Rainbow family and the state of North Carolina as their 1987 gathering approached. The state, citing its Mass Gathering Act, sought to prevent the event for lacking a permit, while the Rainbows defended their right to assemble freely under the First Amendment. Judge Dave recounts the tensions between the state's concerns over sanitation, safety, and order, and the Rainbow's insistence on spiritual and expressive freedom. Through his narration, he begins to explore the complexity of applying formal law to an informal, leaderless group, revealing the deeper challenge of balancing public welfare with constitutional liberty, the moment where wisdom begins to temper ignorance on both sides. You'll Never Believe the View recounts his unconventional jury view of the Rainbow family's 1987 gathering, in which he personally visits the camp to observe conditions firsthand. Accompanied by attorneys and guides from the Rainbows, he navigates the sprawling, makeshift community in the Nantahala Forest to assess sanitation, safety, and environmental practices at the center of the legal dispute. The experience exposes him to the stark contrasts between the Rainbow's free-spirited lifestyle and the formal structure of the law, offering both humor and insight into their sincerity, organization, and challenges. The View becomes not only a literal look at the camp but also a metaphorical lesson in perspective, showing Judge Dave the human side of the case and how understanding, rather than judgment alone, leads to true wisdom. In Part 2, in the Camp of the Rainbows, Judge David Sentelle vividly recounts his first-hand journey through the 1987 Rainbow family gathering after deciding to personally inspect the site at the center of the legal dispute. Immersed in the camp's colorful, chaotic world, he observes the Rainbow's communal kitchens, sanitation systems, child care, music, and open lifestyles, mixing humor, curiosity, and judicial skepticism. Judge Dave captures both the charm and the disorder of this countercultural experiment, revealing a surprising degree of organization amid apparent anarchy. Through these encounters, he gains a deeper understanding of the Rainbow's ideals and the sincerity behind their peace and love ethos, while also recognizing the legitimate public health and legal concerns that brought them to his courtroom. The chapter thus bridges two worlds, the rule of law and the spirit of freedom, through the judge's candid, often comic field study of a society unlike any other. Welcome Home describes his arrival at the Rainbow family gathering, where he is greeted by the camp's friendly yet unconventional welcome committee. Guided by colorful figures such as Welcome Woman, Garrick Beck, and Stephen Principal, he begins his tour of the sprawling encampment while trying to blend in despite his obvious formality as a federal judge. The Rainbow's warmth and openness contrast sharply with the state's portrayal of them as unruly or dangerous, revealing a community built on hospitality and idealism, though not without eccentricity. Through humor and observation, Judge Dave captures the cultural and philosophical gap between government authority and the free-spirited gathering he's been sent to evaluate, setting the tone for his exploration of how law, liberty, and mutual respect can coexist in the real world. Of Bumpers and Babies, Kitchens and Camps continues his tour of the Rainbow family gathering, observing the daily life and organization within the camp. He notes the communal kitchens, childcare areas, and makeshift living spaces that sustain thousands of attendees, marveling at the Rainbow's ability to create order amid seeming chaos. Judge Dave describes the group's emphasis on sharing, cooperation, and environmental respect, while also acknowledging the health and safety risks inherent in such an unregulated, transient community. His encounters, with parents, cooks, and volunteers, reveal a surprisingly structured sense of responsibility beneath the group's free-spirited exterior. Through a mix of humor and judicial curiosity, Judge Dave captures the paradox of the Rainbows, a counterculture that thrives on harmony and improvisation, yet challenges the very systems designed to maintain public order and safety. Of Hippies, Hollows and Holes recounts one of the more humorous and awkward moments of his visit to the Rainbow Gathering, his inspection of the camp's latrines and bathing areas. Guided by the ever-cheerful welcome woman and other rainbows, he witnesses the community's unconventional approach to sanitation, including open-air facilities and casual nudity, which test his composure and sense of propriety. Amid his discomfort, Judge Dave reflects on the clash between conventional norms and the rainbow's free-spirited lifestyle, noting both their disregard for social convention and their earnest attempts at self-sufficiency and environmental care. Blending wit with legal observation, he uses these earthy encounters to highlight the tension between law, decency, and liberty in a community that seeks to live by its own rules. On Calm, Mash and Not So Calm Observers reflects on the contrasting temperaments surrounding the Rainbow Gathering, between the peaceful, sometimes chaotic idealism of the rainbows and the anxious vigilance of law enforcement and local officials. While the rainbows call for calm and communal harmony, outside observers often view the gathering with suspicion or alarm, fearing disorder, lawlessness, or contagion. Judge Dave observes that much of the tension stems from misunderstanding rather than malice. The rainbow's unconventional lifestyle unsettles those accustomed to structure and authority, while government agents struggle to reconcile tolerance with enforcement. Through wry humor and keen observation, he underscores how perception shapes conflict, and how maintaining calm, in both judgment and governance, is often the hardest task when two worlds collide. Who Are the Rainbows? Explores the identity, origins, and philosophy of the Rainbow family, the eclectic group at the center of his 1987 case. He describes them as a loose, leaderless coalition of idealists, spiritual seekers, and countercultural veterans united by their devotion to peace, love, and communal living rather than any formal organization or creed. While they reject hierarchy and materialism, they display surprising order in their self-governed encampments and rituals. Judge Dave notes the diversity within the group, from hippies and environmentalists to drifters and mystics, making them difficult for both the law and society to categorize. Through this portrayal, he conveys both his bemusement and growing respect for their sincerity, showing how the rainbows represent a living challenge to conventional ideas of authority, citizenship, and community. On Barter, Babies and Why Rainbows Are Not Really Multicolored humorously examines the social and economic life within the Rainbow family gathering, where money is replaced by a barter system and generosity serves as the community's true currency. He observes how food, crafts, and childcare are freely shared, reflecting a sincere, if idealistic, attempt to live out principles of cooperation and equality. Yet, Judge Dave also notes the irony behind the group's name. Despite calling themselves rainbows, their membership is not nearly as diverse as their message implies, being composed largely of white, middle-class idealists. With his trademark blend of wit and observation, he captures both the charm and contradictions of this utopian experiment, revealing a community driven by good intentions but inevitably shaped by the limits of human nature and social reality. More on Health, Hippie Clothes and Handsome Hikers continues his inspection of the Rainbow family gathering, focusing on the camp's sanitation, hygiene, and overall organization. He describes the Rainbow's efforts to maintain cleanliness through color-coded recycling systems, makeshift first aid stations, and careful food preparation practices, revealing an unexpected level of order amid their rustic lifestyle. At the same time, he humorously recounts the unconventional attire, or lack thereof, of the campers and his own amused discomfort among so many freely clothed, or unclothed, participants. Judge Dave's observations blend humor, cultural contrast, and judicial curiosity, showing how the rainbows, despite their eccentricity, take genuine responsibility for their community's welfare while still embodying a spirit of unrestrained individuality and nonconformity. On a Symbolic Shower Curtain and a Pleasant Pachyderm recounts two memorable encounters that illustrate the whimsical yet meaningful character of the Rainbow family gathering. The symbolic shower curtain becomes a humorous metaphor for the rainbow's blend of practicality and idealism, an improvised attempt at privacy and decency amid a community that often disregards both. The Pleasant Pachyderm, a live elephant featured in one of the camp's parades, symbolizes the group's childlike joy, creativity, and disregard for convention. Through these colorful episodes, Judge Dave captures the surreal mix of absurdity and sincerity that defines the rainbows, revealing how their spontaneous, theatrical expressions of peace and unity challenge the judges' and society's expectations of order, propriety, and purpose. Entertainment, Rest and Relaxation, of Body and Rules, vividly describes the music, dancing, and uninhibited celebration that characterize the Rainbow family gathering's social life. Observing a lively performance where adults and children join hands in rhythmic song and dance, often with scant regard for clothing, he reflects with humor and mild disbelief on the community's carefree rejection of convention. The rainbow's revelry, blending spiritual ritual and playful chaos, embodies their ideal of peace, freedom, and communal harmony, even as it tests the boundaries of public decency and order. Through Judge Dave's amused yet thoughtful lens, this section captures the joyful anarchy of a group that finds liberation not in structure but in spontaneous expression and shared humanity. Back Toward Normalcy describes his gradual return from the surreal, free-spirited world of the rainbow gathering to the structured realities of conventional life and law. After days immersed in the rainbow's unconventional community, he reflects on the contrast between their idealistic pursuit of peace and the practical constraints of society. Though amused and at times bewildered, Judge Dave gains an appreciation for their sincerity in their attempts, however imperfect, to live out their values of harmony and simplicity. As he steps back toward normalcy, he recognizes that both the rainbows and the legal system he represents seek order and meaning, though by very different paths, leaving him with a deeper understanding of freedom, tolerance, and the human yearning for community. Down and Out recounts his descent, both literal and figurative, from the high ideals and eccentric energy of the rainbow gathering back into the ordinary world. As he and his companions leave the camp, he reflects on the mix of relief, exhaustion, and lingering fascination that follows their unconventional jury view. The trek out of the forest symbolizes a return to order, but also an awareness that the rainbow's strange, idealistic experiment, though chaotic and imperfect, reveals something genuine about the human desire for peace and connection. With his trademark humor and humility, Judge Dave closes this part of the narrative by acknowledging that while he remains a judge grounded in law, his experience among the rainbows offered him an unexpected education in compassion, perspective, and the limits of judgment. In Part 3, Toward a Day of Decision, Judge David Sentelle shifts from his field observations of the rainbow family gathering to the legal and constitutional questions at the heart of the case. He recounts the courtroom proceedings that followed his visit, where the state of North Carolina sought to enforce its Mass Gathering Act against the rainbows, while the group defended their right to assemble under the First Amendment. Judge Dave explores the clash between public health regulations and individual liberties, dissecting arguments about jurisdiction, constitutionality, and the limits of government authority. Blending legal insight with dry humor, he shows how both sides struggled to reconcile freedom with responsibility. Ultimately, the day of decision becomes more than a ruling, it's a meditation on how law can preserve order without extinguishing the human spirit that thrives on freedom and expression. A lesson in the law, theory or practice? Reflects on the complex legal issues raised by the Rainbow family case as he travels with the attorneys involved. Their spirited debate over North Carolina's Mass Gathering Act exposes key constitutional tensions between state regulation and the freedoms of speech and assembly. Judge Dave challenges both sides, questioning whether the law can justly restrict gatherings like the rainbows and whether the rainbows themselves have followed proper legal channels. He also explores broader judicial principles, such as jurisdiction and the limits of federal authority, contrasting the idealism of doing the right thing with the discipline of applying the law correctly. With his characteristic wit and pragmatism, Judge Dave highlights the gap between legal theory and real-world practice, showing how judges must balance conscience, law, and common sense when principles collide. A Hard Day's Night recounts the exhausting and often tense night leading up to his court decision in the Rainbow family case. After a day filled with legal wrangling, personal reflection, and the lingering impressions of his unconventional field visit, Judge Dave grapples with how to craft a fair ruling that respects both the state's duty to protect public welfare and the rainbow's constitutional right to assemble. The Hard Day's Night becomes both literal and symbolic, a sleepless struggle between law and liberty, reason and empathy. Through fatigue and contemplation, Judge Dave reveals the humanity behind judicial decision-making, showing that true justice often lies not in rigid adherence to rules, but in the hard work of understanding all sides with patience, humility, and clarity. According We Will Go narrates the courtroom phase of the Rainbow family case, where the free-spirited ideals of the rainbows meet the formal procedures of federal law. The hearing brings together an unlikely mix of lawyers, state officials, and countercultural witnesses, creating both tension and unintentional comedy. Judge Dave observes how the courtroom becomes a symbolic meeting ground between two worldviews, one rooted in authority and order, the other in freedom and spontaneity. Despite the clash, he approaches the proceedings with fairness and dry humor, recognizing the sincerity on both sides. The section highlights how the judicial process, though imperfect, serves as a necessary bridge between individual liberty and collective responsibility, a courtroom dance where law, common sense, and human decency must all keep rhythm. State versus the Hippies details the formal courtroom confrontation between the state of North Carolina and the Rainbow family, humorously framing it as a clash between establishment authority and countercultural freedom. The state argues that the Rainbows violated the Mass Gathering Act by holding their large event without a permit, while the Rainbows defend their actions as an exercise of constitutional rights to free speech and peaceful assembly. Through testimony and legal argument, Judge Dave explores the tension between public safety, environmental stewardship, and personal liberty. His narration, equal parts serious legal reasoning and wry observation, reveals both the absurdities and the significance of trying to apply structured law to an unstructured people. Ultimately, the case becomes a reflection on how democracy must balance order with tolerance for those who live, quite literally, outside the norm. The Age of Consent describes the intense negotiations that lead to a consent judgment between the state of North Carolina and the Rainbow family. Recognizing that strict enforcement of the law would neither protect public health nor preserve constitutional freedoms, Judge Dave encourages both sides to find common ground voluntarily rather than through coercion. The resulting agreement allows the Rainbows to continue their gathering under specific health and safety conditions, satisfying the state's concerns while preserving the group's rights. With characteristic humor and insight, Judge Dave portrays the process as both exhausting and enlightening, a testament to the power of compromise in law and in life. The Age of Consent, in his telling, becomes not just a legal term but a metaphor for maturity, reason, and the hard-earned wisdom of mutual understanding. Just, or unjust? For the Record reflects on the courtroom aftermath of the Rainbow family case, examining how his consent judgment was received by both the state and the Rainbows. As witnesses, lawyers, and defendants react with a mix of relief, skepticism, and lingering frustration, Judge Dave considers the ambiguities of justice, how a ruling can be both legally sound and emotionally unsatisfying. He acknowledges that while the agreement upheld constitutional principles and public safety, neither side felt it fully vindicated their cause. With a blend of humor and humility, Judge Dave admits that justice in such complex, human cases rarely feels absolute. Rather, it exists for the record as the best approximation of fairness achievable when idealism and authority collide. In Part 4, Return to the Rainbows, Judge David Sentelle recounts his return to the Rainbow family gathering after the court's consent judgment to ensure compliance with its terms. Accompanied by state officials and his law clerk, he finds the Rainbows still encamped in the Nantahala forest, exuberant as ever and largely cooperative in fulfilling the court's conditions. Through humorous and insightful encounters, such as discussions with Welcome Woman and other colorful figures, Judge Dave observes the group's genuine effort to honor their agreement while maintaining their free-spirited ethos. The visit becomes both a legal inspection and a personal reflection on tolerance, community, and the limits of judicial authority. With characteristic wit and fairness, Judge Dave portrays the Rainbow's strange harmony between chaos and responsibility, illustrating how law and liberty can coexist, even if awkwardly, when both sides act in good faith. The Ratio at the bridge recounts his return to the Rainbow gathering site and his encounter with law enforcement stationed at the bridge leading into the camp. The Ratio refers to the delicate balance between police presence and Rainbow participants, an uneasy truce symbolizing the broader tension between authority and freedom. Judge Dave observes how troopers, rangers, and Rainbows coexist warily but peacefully, each respecting the other's space under the terms of the court's consent order. With his usual mix of humor and judicial reflection, he notes that maintaining this fragile equilibrium requires both restraint from the state and responsibility from the Rainbows. The bridge becomes a fitting metaphor for his entire experience, a literal and symbolic crossing between two worlds that must learn to meet halfway. It ain't over when it's over discovers that the Rainbow gathering continues even after its official end, with thousands of participants lingering in the forest to clean up, hold council meetings, and plan for the next year. Returning to the site to inspect compliance with the consent order, Judge Dave encounters familiar faces, including the ever-spirited Welcome Woman, and finds the Rainbows still cheerful, disorganized, and earnest in their efforts to reclaim the forest. His observations blend amusement with respect as he sees genuine attempts to honor their environmental commitments, even amid lingering chaos. The title captures his realization that the Rainbow experience, like the larger tensions between freedom and regulation, never truly ends, it simply evolves, leaving lessons about cooperation, responsibility, and the persistence of idealism. On the Trail again recounts his follow-up inspection of the Rainbow gathering, traveling deeper into the Nantahala forest to verify that the group is abiding by the court's consent order. Accompanied by law enforcement and Rainbow representatives, he humorously describes the rugged trek, the colorful personalities he encounters, and the lingering tension between official scrutiny and the Rainbow's easygoing spirit. Despite the camp's unconventional appearance, Judge Dave finds that most of the agreed-upon health and safety measures have been met. Along the way, he reflects on the strange camaraderie that has developed between former courtroom adversaries and the idealists of the forest. The journey, both literal and symbolic, reaffirms his belief that law and liberty can coexist, not through confrontation, but through mutual respect and understanding earned on the trail again. Stand for the benediction brings closure to his unusual odyssey with the Rainbow family, reflecting on the resolution of the case and his final encounters with the group. As he revisits the camp one last time, Judge Dave observes the Rainbow's continued good spirits and their genuine effort to honor the court's consent order. What began as a legal conflict concludes with an unexpected sense of mutual respect and even affection between judge and campers. With his characteristic wit and humility, Judge Dave frames the experience as both a professional duty and a moral lesson, one about tolerance, humanity, and the surprising ways people from vastly different worlds can find common ground. The benediction becomes not just an ending, but a blessing on understanding and coexistence, offered by a judge who has learned as much from the Rainbows as they did from him. Murphy's Law and Order recounts the chaotic and unpredictable moments that follow his final dealings with the Rainbow family, proof, he jokes, that anything that can go wrong, will. As the gathering winds down, miscommunications, minor disputes, and logistical mishaps test the patience of both Rainbows and officials. Yet, amid the confusion, Judge Dave observes that the spirit of cooperation largely endures, a testament to the fragile order that emerged from apparent anarchy. Blending humor with reflection, he likens the scene to a living illustration of Murphy's Law tempered by human goodwill. Despite inevitable mistakes, the system, legal, social, and personal, still manages to hold together. The episode becomes a fitting epilogue to his time among the Rainbows, reminding him that justice and harmony are never perfect, but often prevail through persistence, patience, and a touch of grace. The eyes and ears of the forest reflects on his awareness that, during his visits to the Rainbow gathering, news of his presence quickly spread through the camp. He realizes the Rainbow's informal yet efficient communication network, built on word of mouth and curiosity, functions much like the forest itself, alive, interconnected, and always listening. Judge Dave explains that while he knew the group's main concern was hiding their drugs from law enforcement, he viewed this as irrelevant to his judicial role, which was to ensure compliance with the consent order, not to police behavior. With characteristic wit and insight, he contrasts his own legal vigilance with the Rainbow's organic intelligence system, recognizing that both rely on observation, rumor, and trust. The section becomes a meditation on awareness and authority, how law, like nature, depends on many unseen eyes and ears to maintain balance. In Part 5, Looking for the End of the Rainbows, Judge David Sentelle reflects on the aftermath of the 1987 Rainbow Gathering and the lingering legal, social, and personal impressions it left behind. Returning to the Nantahala forest and his courtroom duties, he finds that while the Rainbows have dispersed, their presence, and the lessons from the case, remain. Through a mix of humor and wisdom, Judge Dave revisits follow-up legal matters, from citizens' complaints to jurisdictional puzzles, using them to explore broader themes of justice, standing, and the limits of judicial authority. As he seeks the end of the Rainbows, he realizes that what endures is not the case itself but its meaning, a reminder that law must balance order with compassion, and that freedom, even in its most unconventional forms, is an essential and enduring part of the American landscape. Don't Kill All the Lawyers humorously reflects on the aftermath of the Rainbow family case and the various legal complications that followed the 1987 gathering. As new motions, complaints, and jurisdictional questions arose, often from those only tangentially involved, Judge Dave uses Shakespeare's famous line to underscore both the frustrations and the necessity of lawyers in maintaining order amid chaos. He recounts how some participants and outside observers misused the legal system, filing misguided or overzealous claims, and contrasts this with the professionalism and good faith shown by the case's original attorneys. Through wit and insight, Judge Dave defends the role of the law and its practitioners as imperfect but essential instruments of justice, reminding readers that while lawyers can be exasperating, without them society would quickly descend into confusion and disorder. Who Shall the Guardians Guard? Recounts a particularly challenging chambers conference with 3 self-represented Rainbow family members who came to raise complaints after the gathering. The meeting quickly devolves into chaos, testing the judge's patience and highlighting the limits of judicial authority when faced with unconventional litigants. Using humor and sharp observation, Judge Dave reflects on the irony of having to mediate between those who distrust all forms of governance and the very system meant to protect their rights. He broadens the episode into a philosophical question: if judges, police, and lawyers are society's guardians, who ensures that they act justly and wisely? The answer, he implies, lies in humility, integrity, and faith in the rule of law, even when that law must extend grace to those who least understand or respect it. Merrily they roll their own humorously reflects on the self-sufficiency and eccentric independence of the Rainbow family in the months following their 1987 gathering. As new minor legal and social issues arise, he observes how the Rainbows continue to live according to their own rules, rolling their own cigarettes, making their own decisions, and even pursuing their own interpretations of justice. Their defiance of convention and reliance on self-governance both amuse and impress him, revealing a community that, despite its flaws, remains committed to freedom and personal responsibility. Through wit and reflection, Judge Dave contrasts their homemade, idealistic world with the structured formality of the courts, concluding that while the Rainbows may roll their own in every sense, their independence embodies a stubborn but distinctly American spirit that the law must sometimes learn to tolerate. Free the Rainbow 8 recounts the aftermath of several Rainbow family members being arrested following the 1987 gathering, an episode that reignites tensions between the free-spirited campers and law enforcement. The so-called Rainbow 8 become symbols of resistance within the movement, prompting outcry and confusion over legal authority and fairness. Judge Dave humorously but thoughtfully explains how these cases were handled within the bounds of due process, emphasizing that even unconventional defendants are entitled to justice, and subject to accountability. Through his wry commentary, he highlights the challenges of applying structured law to an unstructured people while maintaining judicial impartiality. The episode underscores his broader theme, that freedom and law are not opposites, but partners that must constantly negotiate their uneasy coexistence. In the epilogue, Judge David Sentelle reflects on the lasting impact of his experience with the Rainbow family and the unusual court case that brought them together. Though he never again saw the Rainbows as a group, the memory of their gathering and the lessons it taught him about law, freedom, and human nature endured. Now serving on the Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., he looks back with humor and fondness on the event that once thrust him into a world far removed from the courtroom's orderliness. The story closes on a lighthearted note when his former law clerk jokingly asks for time off to attend another Rainbow reunion, reminding him that, while cases end, the spirit of curiosity, compassion, and chaos that define the Rainbows continues to ripple through life and law. Garrick Beck's reflections on Judge Dave. Rainbow family member Garrick Beck offers his own perspective on Judge David Sentelle's account of the 1987 gathering, affirming the judge's fairness, humor, and largely accurate portrayal of events. Beck provides additional context about the North Carolina Mass Gathering Act, explaining how such laws, hastily created after Woodstock, often blurred the line between commercial and non-commercial events, unfairly impacting expressive gatherings like the Rainbows. Through his thoughtful and good-natured commentary, Beck acknowledges the respect and balance Judge Dave showed in handling the case, despite their cultural differences. His reflections transform the story from a legal curiosity into a shared human narrative, one in which law and liberty, establishment and counterculture, briefly met on common ground of understanding and mutual respect. To crack the nut, you only have to crack the nutshell. Garrick Beck explains the legal and historical context behind the North Carolina Mass Gathering Act, the statute at the center of Judge Sentelle's case with the Rainbow family. He describes how such laws, created in reaction to Woodstock, were often hastily written and overly broad, lumping together commercial festivals and non-commercial expressive gatherings like the Rainbows. Beck argues that this conflation made the law inherently flawed and ripe for constitutional challenge. Using wit and insight, he likens understanding the issue to cracking a nutshell. Once one looks past appearances, the core problem becomes clear: the law's failure to distinguish between profit-driven events and gatherings rooted in free expression. His reflection underscores the enduring tension between government regulation and the right to assemble freely. A few words about myself. Garrick Beck offers a personal reflection on his background and his long involvement with the Rainbow family, providing context for his perspective on Judge Sentelle's account. He explains his upbringing in a family of artists and activists, his lifelong commitment to creativity, community, and social responsibility, and how those values naturally led him to the Rainbow movement. Beck presents himself not as a lawbreaker or rebel, but as someone seeking harmony between people and nature, freedom and cooperation. Through this brief, candid self-portrait, he humanizes the countercultural world the Rainbows represent and highlights the shared humanity that allowed a federal judge and a self-described hippie to find mutual respect and understanding across the divides of class, culture, and law. One Ralph, two Ralphs, Russian boars, and rumors galore. Garrick Beck humorously recalls the confusion, myths, and colorful characters that surrounded the 1987 Rainbow Gathering and its legal proceedings. He reflects on the figure of Ralph, a composite of several real people whose rugged, protective presence at the camp became the stuff of legend, blurring fact and folklore. Beck also pokes fun at the many wild rumors that circulated during the event, from supposed threats and conspiracies to tales of escaped Russian boars, which symbolize the atmosphere of chaos, paranoia, and playfulness that define the gathering. Through wit and storytelling, Beck captures the absurdity and humanity of the moment, showing how truth, rumor, and personality intertwine to create the larger-than-life story that Judge Sentelle so memorably chronicled. Our Days in Court, Garrick Beck recounts the Rainbow family's experiences during the legal hearings before Judge David Sentelle, offering his insider perspective on the courtroom drama. He describes the tension, uncertainty, and occasional humor as the Rainbows, accustomed to life in the forest, found themselves navigating the formal world of federal law. Beck acknowledges Sentelle's fairness and curiosity, noting that the judge treated the unconventional defendants with respect and an open mind. He also highlights the Rainbow's commitment to presenting themselves sincerely, emphasizing environmental responsibility and peaceful intent rather than defiance. Blending reflection and humor, Beck portrays the court sessions as moments of unlikely connection between two opposing worlds, where the spirit of cooperation ultimately prevailed over confrontation. Video villainy? Garrick Beck revisits the controversy over the media coverage of the Rainbow Gathering and its court case, particularly the incident involving a video crew that filmed Judge Sentelle interacting with campers, including a naked woman, during his visit to the site. Beck humorously recalls how rumors and exaggerations turned the harmless footage into a minor scandal, despite the judge's professionalism. He uses the story to comment on how media distortion can sensationalize truth, turning genuine human moments into spectacle. With his trademark wit, Beck defends Sentelle's integrity and reflects on how both the Rainbows and the court were misrepresented by outsiders seeking drama. The episode ultimately underscores the power, and danger, of perception, reminding readers that even villainy can be manufactured by the camera's lens. In the judge's chambers, Garrick Beck recounts the memorable meeting between Rainbow family representatives and Judge David Sentelle held in the judge's chambers during the height of the 1987 case. The informal yet tense conference brought the free-spirited Rainbows face-to-face with the structured decorum of federal law. Beck humorously describes the cultural clash, the earthy smell of forest life meeting polished courtroom formality, and how Sentelle managed the discussion with patience, wit, and authority. Despite the awkwardness, Beck recognizes the judge's effort to listen and understand their perspective, even when communication broke down. The encounter, both absurd and meaningful, epitomized the larger theme of mutual respect across profound differences, a federal judge and a band of idealists finding, if not agreement, at least a moment of shared humanity within the rule of law. And in the end, Garrick Beck offers a thoughtful closing reflection on the entire Rainbow family case and his interactions with Judge David Sentelle. Looking back, he expresses gratitude for the judge's fairness, humor, and willingness to see beyond stereotypes, recognizing that their unlikely encounter bridged two vastly different worlds, law and counterculture. Beck acknowledges that while the Rainbows remained committed to their vision of peace, freedom, and communal living, the court experience taught them valuable lessons about responsibility and dialogue within a structured society. With warmth and humility, he concludes that true understanding arises not from agreement but from respect, and that in this shared experience, both the Rainbows and the judge grew wiser. The section closes the story on a note of reconciliation, insight, and enduring humanity.